When Married with Children first burst onto television screens, it did not simply challenge the rules of the American family sitcom, it tore them apart. This was not another cheerful story about a smiling father, a patient mother, and perfect children living in a spotless home. This was chaos wrapped in comedy. It was rebellion served through laughter. And behind those laughs was a storm of secrets, shocking casting decisions, bitter conflicts, heartbreaking tragedies, and controversies that shook the television industry to its very core. For years, these stories were whispered only in the background of Hollywood. Now, decades later, Ed O'Neill and his co-stars have revealed what most fans never imagined, truth that can forever change how you see the Bundy family. It was a show born out of defiance, nurtured by scandal, and fueled by the raw honesty of its flawed characters. A show that dared to say what no one else would, that turned dysfunction into a mirror of American life. And in doing so, Married with Children created not just laughter, but history. So how did a sitcom that many critics called crude and offensive rise to become one of the most influential shows in television history? How did it survive boycotts, censorship, personal tragedies, and media firestorms only to end up reshaping what audiences thought comedy could be? This is the untold story of the Bundys, the family that America loved to hate, and the show that changed everything. Long before the Bundy family made history, two men, Michael G. Moy and Ron Levitt, sat down with one bold idea. They wanted to create a sitcom that was nothing like the ones America already adored. At the time, network television was dominated by glossy, idealized families. The Huxtables from The Cosby Show were the perfect household. Educated, well-off, endlessly supportive. That kind of clean, heartwarming comedy was the gold standard. But to Moy and Levitt, it was also painfully fake. So under the working title, Not the Cosbys, they wrote a script designed as a direct rebellion. Every value those perfect sitcoms stood for, they would flip upside down. Instead of elegant living rooms, they placed viewers in a worn-down Chicago house, where the furniture sagged as badly as its father figure. Instead of the successful, smiling breadwinner, they created Al Bundy, a tired shoe salesman trapped in a life of missed dreams and endless disappointments. Instead of a supportive, nurturing wife, they gave audiences Peggy Bundy, flamboyant, sarcastic, and proudly lazy. And instead of angelic children, they introduced Kelly and Bud, one ditzy and rebellious, the other conniving and desperate. It was crude, it was raw, and it was real. The creators leaned into taboo subjects that TV rarely touched: sex, money problems, disillusionment with family life. But their purpose was not just to shock. Their goal was satire, to hold up a mirror to American society and make people laugh at a truth they often wanted to ignore. Surprisingly, Fox, still a young network trying to break into the big leagues, saw the genius in this. While ABC, NBC, and CBS tiptoed carefully around conservative family values, Fox took a gamble. They encouraged Moy and Levitt to push the boundaries further, to break every mold. It was a dangerous strategy, but one that worked. In a single stroke, Fox defined itself as the fearless underdog, willing to broadcast the kind of content that the major networks would not dare to air. And at the center of it all was a show that was about to introduce America to a new kind of family. One that was messy, dysfunctional, and yet unforgettable. When the scripts were ready, the real test began: finding actors who could bring this dysfunctional family to life. The casting process was not just about filling roles, it was about capturing a spirit, a tone that had never been seen on American television before. The creators knew that if they chose wrong, the show's bold vision would collapse before it even reached the screen. Ed O'Neill still remembers his audition in 1986. He walked into the room, slumped into a chair, and exhaled with the kind of weary sigh only a man crushed by life could give. It was not rehearsed, not performed, it was instinct. In that moment, the room fell silent. Michael Moy and Ron Levitt looked at each other and knew immediately. They had just found Al Bundy. No one else could embody that bitter mix of defeat, sarcasm, and reluctant humor. Ed carried the weight of every failed dream in his posture, and yet he made it funny. It was perfect. Then came the search for Peggy Bundy. Actress Katie Sagal arrived with bright red hair piled high, wearing a tight, provocative outfit that seemed to step straight out of the script. She later admitted she had chosen the look intentionally, wanting to shock the producers with an image that screamed rebellion. The moment she opened her mouth, Peggy Bundy was alive. A wife who teased, taunted, and nagged her husband while refusing to lift a finger around the house. She was outrageous and magnetic, and Katie fit the part as though it had been written for her. The role of Kelly Bundy proved more complicated. At first, Tina Caspery was cast as the blonde daughter, but after the pilot was shot, something felt wrong. The chemistry wasn't there. Fox executives made the risky decision to replace her, and in walked 15-year-old Christina Applegate. Young, confident, and brimming with sly charm, she transformed Kelly into a character that audiences would never forget. Christina was both innocent and mischievous, a teenager who embodied every parent's nightmare and every classmate's crush. She later recalled how the set, despite its biting humor, felt welcoming, like a second family. Bud Bundy's casting followed a similar path. Hunter Carson had originally been chosen for the role, but again, the fit wasn't right. Enter David Faustino, only 12 years old at the time. He picked up the script and immediately captured the sarcastic, scheming energy that Bud required. David admitted later that he felt both thrilled and nervous, especially given how adult the themes were for such a young actor. Still, he settled in quickly, and his sharp timing made Bud more than just the overlooked younger brother. He became a vital part of the family dynamic. And then there was the neighbor. Amanda Bearse stepped into the role of Marcy Rhodes, the straight-laced, socially conscious counterbalance to the Bundys' chaos. She added a satirical bite of her own, standing toe-to-toe with Al Bundy's insults and giving the audience a sharp contrast. Amanda would later say that in the early days, the cast carried a cynical energy, unsure of whether the show's shocking humor would survive. But soon, that skepticism turned into camaraderie. It wasn't long before the cast began to feel like a real family, not the polished families viewers were used to, but one that quarreled, teased, and somehow still held together. Katie Sagal remembered that Ed O'Neill had been funny from the very first minute they worked together. Christina Applegate said that almost instantly the group bonded into a unit that felt real both on and off screen. That chemistry was electric, and it poured onto the stage in every scene they shot. When the pilot was finally completed, Fox executives praised the authentic connection between the Bundy family members. They could see it, the laughter, the tension, the spark that made the show different. But executives also worried that some of the side characters, like Marcy Rhodes, didn't yet have enough punch. The network described the show as sharp but shocking, warning that it might be too daring for some households. But even with those reservations, they gave the green light. From that moment on, the Bundys were set loose on America. And in just a handful of episodes, the show would not only make people laugh, it would drag Fox into a storm of controversy, unlike anything television had seen before. When the first episodes of Married with Children went on air, it became clear that television had entered unfamiliar territory. This was not the safe comfort food of sitcoms like The Cosby Show or Family Ties. The Bundys were messy, rude, selfish, and dysfunctional, and yet people could not look away. For some, it was exhilarating. Finally, a family on television that looked and acted more like the neighbors down the street than the flawless families network executives usually pushed. For others, it was shocking, even offensive, like a stain on the carefully polished image of primetime television. Fox executives, who were themselves still testing the waters as a fledgling network, had expected the show to spark some debate. After all, they had encouraged the creators to lean into their rebellious instincts. But even they were surprised by the intensity of the reactions. The pilot episode revealed the chemistry of the Bundys instantly. Al's bitterness, Peggy's mockery, Kelly's carefree vanity, and Bud's scheming energy clicked together like an explosive formula. In living rooms across America, viewers saw a reflection of family life that was raw and uncomfortable, and that was exactly the point. Behind closed doors, Fox executives admitted the show was sharper, riskier, and more daring than anything else on television. Their official notes praised the vibrant family chemistry, while also worrying that some of the secondary characters lacked the same energy. They described the show as sharp but shocking, a phrase that would prove to be prophetic. Audiences were not prepared for how far the Bundys were willing to go, and in those early episodes it became clear that this was a sitcom built on pushing limits. The risk was already paying off. By the end of its first season, the Bundys had sparked conversations in schools, workplaces, and even political circles. Was this the end of wholesome family entertainment, or the beginning of a new, more honest era in comedy? Critics were divided. Some blasted the show as vulgar trash that mocked the values Americans held dear. Others hailed it as a necessary antidote to the sanitized perfection of mainstream sitcoms. In either case, the Bundys had arrived, and no one could ignore them. The show's first brush with controversy came sooner than expected. A handful of episodes played with themes of sexuality, money, and class struggles in ways that made censors nervous. While older networks would have pulled back, Fox doubled down, using the controversy as free advertising. Instead of apologizing, they leaned into the Bundys' reputation as the family America was never supposed to see. That decision positioned Fox as the edgy new player in television, a network willing to risk public outrage in exchange for cultural relevance. It was a gamble that would define the show. Only a few episodes into its run, Married with Children had achieved what many sitcoms failed to do in years. It had people talking nonstop. Some viewers tuned in because they loved the unapologetic humor. Others watched out of outrage, and still others tuned in simply because they did not want to miss what everyone else was debating. Whether fans or critics, they were all watching. And soon, that tension between laughter and outrage would explode into one of the biggest boycotts American television had ever seen. In 1989, everything that Married with Children had been building toward finally erupted. Up until then, the Bundys were already whispered about in households across America, but one episode would ignite a cultural firestorm that pushed the show out of comedy and into national controversy. The episode was titled, "Her Cups Runneth Over." On the surface, it was just another outrageous Bundy adventure. Al Bundy and his neighbor Jefferson sneaking off to buy lingerie for their wives. But once the episode aired, it was as if a match had been thrown onto dried leaves. Scenes that included semi-nude situations, sexual innuendo, and even a flamboyant gay character wearing a crown struck a nerve in a country still clinging tightly to conservative television standards. For many viewers, it was all in good fun, but for one woman in Michigan, it was unforgivable. Her name was Terry Rakolta, a mother of four and notably the sister-in-law of the state's governor. Outraged by what she had seen, she launched a campaign that would shake the foundations of Fox itself. She began writing letters to advertisers, demanding they pull their sponsorship from the show. In her eyes, Married with Children was not simply offensive, it was dangerous for American families. At first, Fox brushed it off. Controversy was part of the Bundy brand, after all. But when the media picked up the story, it spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Rakolta's boycott was headline news. Major corporations, Gillette, Warner Lambert, and even Coca-Cola, announced they would no longer sponsor the show. For a young network like Fox, still struggling to compete with ABC, CBS, and NBC, this was not just bad press. It was a direct hit to their revenue stream. The pressure became so great that Fox made a decision they rarely made with the Bundys. They pulled an episode. I'll See You in Court, an installment featuring a storyline about a couple's sex tape accidentally recorded at a hotel, was quietly shelved. Executives feared that airing it would be like pouring gasoline onto the fire already blazing around the show. Ed O'Neill would later recall the intensity of those days. "The pressure was incredible," he admitted, "but in a strange way, it made us sharper. We had to work harder to deliver the laughs." Katie Sagal described the same period as being under a microscope, with every line, every gesture scrutinized by both critics and the press. For Christina Applegate, the backlash was even more personal. Suddenly thrust into the spotlight at just 16, she became a reluctant teenage sex symbol, both idolized and criticized before she was old enough to understand the weight of it. But here is the twist no one saw coming. The boycott backfired. Instead of killing the show, the outrage only fueled its popularity. Viewership spiked. Before the boycott, the show sat in the mid-range of network rankings, often outside the top 40. But after the controversy, it surged into the national top 50, season after season. Families who had never even heard of the Bundys now tuned in just to see what the fuss was about. The more critics raged, the more curious the audience became. Fox, realizing what they had on their hands, turned the controversy into part of the marketing. They positioned Married with Children not as a sitcom for every family, but as a show, proudly too bold, too raw, and too offensive for traditional households. It was rebellion wrapped in primetime packaging, and it made people want to watch even more. Even Rakolta herself would later admit, somewhat ruefully, that her boycott had only made the show more famous. Critics labeled it a textbook example of the Streisand effect, when attempts to suppress something only make it spread further. By trying to silence the Bundys, the boycott had immortalized them. And yet, for all the success, the scars remained. Controversial episodes were edited down when they re-aired, and dialogue was softened for DVD releases. Hardcore fans noticed, complaining that the raw Bundy spirit had been watered down. Still, the damage had been done, and the show had been transformed. It was no longer just a sitcom, it was a cultural lightning rod, a show that forced America to ask uncomfortable questions about what television should be. The boycott changed everything. It set the Bundys apart from every other sitcom on the air, cementing their reputation as television's most dangerous family. And while the outside world argued, behind the cameras, new tensions and tragedies were beginning to surface, ones that would shake the cast as much as the controversies did the network. The roar of controversy outside the studio walls was only half the story. Inside, behind the cameras and away from the laughter of the live audience, Married with Children carried its own private battles, conflicts, heartbreaks, and tragedies that left deep scars on the cast. For all the dysfunction played out on screen, the real lives of the actors often mirrored the chaos in ways the audience never knew. One of the earliest cracks formed between Ed O'Neill and Amanda Beers, who played the Bundys' neighbor Marcy Rhodes. In 1989, TV Guide ran a special cover celebrating the show, but it only featured Ed and Katie Sagal. Amanda and David Garrison, who played her husband Steve, were left out entirely. For Amanda, the exclusion felt like a public dismissal of her importance to the series. She was hurt, but Ed chose not to comment at the time. Years later, he admitted he should have spoken up. "I didn't think it would leave such a lasting mark," he confessed, but it did. Their friendship cooled and the rift deepened over time. The divide grew so wide that when Amanda got married in 1993, she made the painful decision not to invite Ed. She explained later that his presence might make some of her guests uncomfortable, given their strained relationship. Ed took it personally, and his disappointment showed in interviews years afterward. What had started as a small slight in the press had turned into a wound that never fully healed. Conflict, however, was not the only burden the cast carried. In 1991, Katie Sagal faced one of the darkest moments of her life. Pregnant during the show's run, her storyline had been written to include a new Bundy baby. But at 7 months, she suffered a devastating stillbirth. It was a loss that shook her to the core. The writers scrambled to rework the script, And what was supposed to be a joyful addition to the Bundy family was rewritten as a surreal dream sequence. Al Bundy imagining Peggy pregnant. It was their way of protecting Katie from reliving her grief on screen. In interviews later, she admitted it was the hardest time of her life, but she returned to set determined, supported quietly by some of her castmates, even as she tried to wear Peggy's sarcasm like armor. The writers also stumbled with creative decisions that failed spectacularly. In 1992, they introduced a new character named Seven, Peggy Bundy's nephew, hoping to refresh the storyline. Audiences hated him. Letters flooded Fox from furious fans calling the character unnecessary and disruptive. Within a season, Seven disappeared without explanation, a reminder that the Bundys worked best as their original dysfunctional unit. But the strain of making the show did not end there. Every episode was filmed in front of a live audience of 300 to 500 people. That laughter was real, but so was the pressure. Ed O'Neill often had to perform physical comedy that involved stunts, fake collisions, and exaggerated pratfalls. Over the years, these left him with more than a few real bruises. Katie Sagal had to climb back into Peggy's high heels and big hair while privately grieving her loss, trying to laugh when her heart was still broken. Christina Applegate, still a teenager, balanced school, fame, and the sudden burden of being seen as a national sex symbol, something she had never asked for. The long hours and relentless public attention sometimes made small disagreements feel enormous. Minor disputes were magnified by tabloids eager to report any behind-the-scenes drama. What might have been a quiet frustration among colleagues was suddenly splashed across headlines as proof that the cast was feuding. It created a feedback loop of tension where the press's exaggerations made real relationships even more fragile. And yet, there were also moments of genuine closeness. Christina remembered how the cast, despite everything, could sometimes feel like a family after the cameras stopped rolling. There were shared meals, inside jokes, and quiet moments of support that never made it into the gossip columns. But the truth was undeniable, as the show that thrived on dysfunction carried its own share of turmoil off-screen. As these personal struggles simmered, the writers continued to push boundaries on screen, testing censors and outraging critics with some of the most controversial episodes in television history. What happened next would etch Married with Children even deeper into the cultural memory. Episodes so shocking they were debated in living rooms, classrooms, and even political halls. Over the course of 11 seasons, Married with Children became infamous for pushing the limits of what television audiences thought they were ready to see. This was not a show that played it safe. Week after week, it dared to tackle taboo subjects with a grin, slipping dark comedy into places where traditional sitcoms never ventured. For loyal fans, this boldness was thrilling. For critics, it was reckless. Either way, the Bundys never failed to provoke strong reactions. At the top of the list stood the episode that had already caused an uproar, Her Cups Runneth Over. By then, its reputation was sealed as the episode that sparked a nationwide boycott. But it was hardly the last time the Bundys would outrage the public. Another notorious installment, I'll See You in Court, revolved around a couple suing a hotel after accidentally recording themselves on a sex tape. Even by modern standards, the episode was unusually risque, but in the late 1980s, it was radioactive. Fox refused to air it at the time, shelving it for years. Fans only caught glimpses of it later when edited versions appeared in syndication or DVD collections, stripped of much of the original humor that made it so shocking. The show also leaned into political and social satire, often courting controversy by mocking hot-button issues. In The Egg and I, the writers poked fun at the animal rights movement, a storyline that drew protests from activists who felt the show trivialized serious causes. Another memorable episode, No Ma'am, introduced Al Bundy's outrageous men's group, formed in protest against feminism. Critics denounced it as sexist propaganda, while some viewers laughed at its absurd exaggerations of gender politics. Ed O'Neill later explained that he viewed the storyline as satire aimed at extremism in all forms, not as an attack on any one group. Still, the debate raged, and the Bundys were once again at the center of a national conversation. The writers often walked a razor's edge. Episodes were frequently edited, censored, or rewritten when re-aired. Jokes that slipped past censors in the live tapings were sometimes deemed too risky for future broadcasts. Hardcore fans noticed when lines were softened or moments cut, complaining that the Bundys were being robbed of their raw edge. But just as often, those moments of unscripted audacity became iconic. Ed O'Neill developed a habit of ad-libbing in Al Bundy's shoe store or bowling alley scenes, tossing off bitter one-liners that the audience loved and that producers decided to keep. Fans would quote those improvisations for decades, proof that the live wire energy of the show could never be fully contained by censors. Guest stars also played a role in the show's shock factor. One standout appearance came from comedian Sam Kinison, whose explosive performance electrified the set and sent ratings soaring. His wild energy matched the show's anarchic tone perfectly, proving that the right guest could elevate the chaos to new heights. But not all moments were as lighthearted. Christina Applegate, still in her teens, often found herself in uncomfortable situations on set. She later admitted that filming scenes and revealing outfits at just 17 left her feeling exposed, knowing that both the audience and the media would scrutinize her appearance. She carried the pressure quietly, even as fans began to idolize her as a rebellious icon of the 1990s. Physical comedy, too, often came at a cost. Katie Sagal recalled a day when she had to tumble down a staircase repeatedly to capture the perfect shot. By the end of filming, she was bruised and sore, yet still had to deliver Peggy Bundy's sharp, sarcastic punchlines. Ed O'Neill endured his share of injuries as well, throwing his body into slapstick scenes that masked real aches beneath the laughter. What united all of these controversial episodes was their fearlessness. They turned taboo subjects, sex, gender, politics, even activism, into material for dark comedy, forcing audiences to laugh and squirm at the same time. For many, that was the essence of the Bundys, a family that pushed viewers out of their comfort zones, daring them to question what television could show. And yet, as outrageous as the on-screen antics were, the chaos off-screen was about to become just as dramatic. The show's run, which had shocked and entertained millions, would eventually come to an abrupt and unceremonious end. One that left the cast stunned and fans clamoring for answers. By 1997, after 11 seasons of controversy, laughter, and unforgettable moments, Married with Children finally came to an end, but the way it ended stunned almost everyone involved. Unlike other long-running sitcoms that received heartfelt send-offs, cast interviews, or even a farewell special, the Bundys were given no such dignity. The curtain fell quietly, almost carelessly, leaving the very people who had carried the show blindsided. Ed O'Neill discovered the news not from a producer or an official announcement, but from strangers. While visiting Ohio, a couple approached him on the street and asked if it was true that Married with Children had been canceled. Confused, Ed laughed it off, only to later confirm with crew members that the show was, in fact, over. Christina Applegate's discovery was equally unceremonious. She was behind the wheel, driving, when a radio broadcast announced that the show had been canceled. No call, no memo, just a casual mention on the airwaves. The lack of respect left her stunned. For Katie Sagal, the cancellation carried mixed emotions. She had invested years in Peggy Bundy, balancing the weight of personal tragedies with the responsibility of keeping the character alive. While part of her was ready to move forward, the abruptness of the ending left a sour aftertaste. Amanda Barris and David Faustino shared similar sentiments, later remarking that the cast had deserved better than to be informed through chance encounters or the media. After more than a decade of shaping American television, the Bundys vanished without a proper goodbye. And yet, endings often mark new beginnings. Ed O'Neill, once typecast as Al Bundy, staged one of the most surprising comebacks in modern television. In 2009, he re-emerged as Jay Pritchett in Modern Family, a role that flipped his image from downtrodden shoe salesman to wealthy, sharp-witted patriarch. His performance earned him multiple Emmy nominations and reintroduced him to a generation that had never even seen Married with Children. In 2024, he took on the role of Donald Sterling in a critically acclaimed miniseries about an NBA scandal, proving his career was far from over. Katie Sagal, too, reinvented herself. In Sons of Anarchy, she shed Peggy Bundy's wigs and sarcasm, stepping into the powerful, ruthless role of Gemma Teller. The performance won her a Golden Globe and cemented her as a dramatic force far removed from the comedic world she once ruled. She continued to appear at fan conventions, often asked about Bundy stories, where she spoke with honesty about both the laughter and the pain of her time on the show. Christina Applegate built a career that showcased her versatility. She starred in comedies and dramas alike, with her performance in Dead to Me earning critical acclaim. But behind the success was a difficult personal journey. In 2021, she revealed her diagnosis with multiple sclerosis, a disclosure that shocked fans who had grown up watching her. By 2025, she had released a memoir detailing her career, her struggles with MS, and her fight to stay resilient in the face of health challenges. That same year, a sudden hospitalization for a kidney infection reminded fans of her vulnerability, sparking an outpouring of love and support. David Faustino, who had spent his childhood as Bud Bundy, chose a quieter path. He became a voice actor, lending his talents to shows like The Legend of Korra and Dragons, Race to the Edge. He regularly appeared at fan conventions, signing autographs and sharing stories about the show that had defined his youth. Though his fame never reached the level of his co-stars, he remained a beloved figure among die-hard fans. Amanda Burrs transitioned behind the camera, becoming a successful television director. Her career flourished quietly, directing episodes of popular shows while also speaking candidly about her past conflicts with Ed O'Neill. A subject fans still found fascinating decades later, in 2025, she appeared at conventions to discuss her journey, acknowledging both the challenges and triumphs of her career beyond Marcy Rhodes. The end of Married with Children had been messy and abrupt, but the careers of its cast proved that the Bundys' legacy was not a closed chapter. Each actor carried the impact of the show with them, shaping who they became and how audiences remembered them. Though the Bundys had left television screens, they had not left American culture. And that legacy, if anything, only grew stronger in the decades that followed. Even after the lights on the Bundy household went dark in 1997, the impact of Married with Children refused to fade. In the years that followed, the show only grew larger, becoming something bigger than a sitcom. It became a cultural landmark. Streaming platforms revived it for new generations. On Hulu and Peacock, viewers who had never lived through the original run suddenly found themselves binging episode after episode, laughing at jokes written decades earlier. The numbers told the story. In Australia alone, reports in 2025 showed viewership had grown by more than 4 times compared to the year before. Young audiences flooded social media with reactions, admitting they were stunned that a show this old could feel so sharp, fearless, and modern. Many confessed they could not believe such jokes had aired on network television at all. Katie Sagal summed up the show's enduring appeal when she said, "We broke every mold of the family sitcom. The Bundys were not perfect, but they reflected the reality of many people's lives." That truth resonated then and still resonates today. Critics echoed her thoughts, pointing out that the show's genius was not about making viewers love every character. It was about making them unforgettable. Whether you loved them, hated them, or debated them, you remembered them. Its DNA can be traced in some of the most influential comedies that followed. Without the Bundys kicking down the door, there might never have been The Simpsons, Family Guy, or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Each of those shows carried the same defiant spirit, unafraid of taboos, unafraid of offending, unafraid of holding up an ugly but funny mirror to society. The Bundys had proven it could be done and had thrived doing it. Ed O'Neill later explained the secret simply: the show worked because it reflected real life, wrapped in satire. Self-pitying, funny, and real, he once called it. That combination kept the comedy grounded, even when the stories became outrageous. To this day, the cast believes that brand of satire has never lost its value. Even failed revival attempts could not tarnish the legacy. An animated reboot was planned but canceled in 2025, disappointing fans who had hoped for an official reunion. Yet the cancellation only reinforced the Bundys' mythic status. They remained frozen in time, undiluted, untamed, and unapologetic. For audiences, the Bundys were never about teaching moral lessons or offering warm hugs. They were about truth. The bitter, messy, hilarious truth that life rarely looks like a perfect sitcom. That honesty made them unforgettable. And in the crowded world of television comedies, they stood apart as pioneers who dared to tell jokes others would not touch. Decades later, the laughter still echoes, proof that the Bundys changed not just television, but the way people talk about family, society, and comedy itself.